What would you do if your own brother stole everything your father left you and left you with nothing? That's not just some dramatic question. That's the truth of what happened in my family. The Whitmores. To everyone on the outside, we were the kind of family people envied. We lived in a massive estate in Connecticut. My father, Henry Whitmore, built an empire in real estate. My mother, Margaret, was the heart of our home, the glue that kept us together. And then there were the three of us kids, Ethan, the oldest, me, Claire, and Ryan, the youngest. People thought we were perfect. But if you've ever looked closely at a beautiful painting, you know sometimes the cracks are beneath the surface. When my father died, the cracks split wide open. On his last night, as I held his hand, he whispered to me words that burned into my soul. This company is not meant for one. Protect your brothers. Protect our name. I thought he was warning me. I thought he trusted me. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Within weeks, my brother Ethan produced documents. The will had been updated. Somehow, everything, the company, the estate, the assets, fell into his hands. Ryan and I were left with scraps, nothing more than tokens. I confronted him. I begged him to remember Dad's words. But Ethan looked me in the eyes with a coldness I'd never seen before and said, "Business doesn't care about feelings. If you want comfort, Claire, live in memories. I live in reality. Do you know what it feels like to realize your own brother has no room in his heart for you? To realize family means nothing to him?" Ryan tried to reason with him too, but Ethan laughed. "You want something, Ryan? Earn it. Nothing comes free. Not even blood." That was the night everything changed. I walked out of that mansion, the home I'd grown up in, with only my mother's necklace around my neck. It was the last piece of her, the last piece untouched by greed. For nights, I cried. I won't lie about that. But grief has a way of turning into something sharper, stronger. And every time I held that necklace, I made the same vow to myself. I will not beg. I will not break. And one day, Ethan will regret betraying his own blood. Ryan still visited him, still played the role of little brother. But quietly he came to me with information. Ethan's reckless deals, his shady partnerships, the enemies he made along the way. Piece by piece, I started to see how fragile his empire really was. Revenge doesn't scream. It waits. It plans. It strikes where it hurts most. Ethan thought he won. He thought he was untouchable. But he has no idea what's coming. Because my silence isn't surrender. It's the calm before the storm. They always tell you revenge is ugly. They're right. But they forget to mention that it's also surgical. It's not a scream. It's a slow, precise untying of every knot that keeps someone standing. After I left the Whitmore mansion, I did the one thing Ethan never expected. I disappeared into plain sight. I took a job at a boutique consulting firm in Boston. Nothing glamorous, just contracts, spreadsheets, and the kind of late nights that make you invisible. I learned to love being invisible. It gave me time to put pieces together without anyone watching. Ryan became my eyes and my whisper. He still sat across from Ethan at family dinners, still laughed at his jokes, still let Ethan believe the puppet show was intact. But when the dishes were cleared and the whiskey settled, Ryan slipped me what mattered. Copies of private emails, off-the-books transaction receipts, the names Ethan called midnight to midnight. I read them until the ink blurred. Every arrogance he'd displayed had a trail. Shell companies, rushed permits, hush deals with a developer in Jersey who had a history of sleeping on ethics. I learned two things fast. One, Ethan's arrogance was the architect of his downfall. He moved fast and loud and covered tracks with other people's silence. 2. People who protect empires like his are always convinced they're untouchable, until the paperwork doesn't add up. My plan didn't involve theatrics. I wasn't going to storm a meeting brandishing a file and shout, "You're a criminal." That's for movies. Real damage requires method, credibility, leverage, and timing. So I built credibility. I went back to school for a certification in corporate compliance. Another quiet step, another late-night study session in a coffee shop where no one from my old life would see me. I volunteered at a nonprofit reviewing contracts for housing projects. I sat on the other side of the table and learned exactly how people hide the truth in legalese. Everything I learned was a tool. Then I started to use Ryan's breadcrumbs. I planted small questions with people who mattered. A former contractor who'd been stiffed by one of Ethan's subsidiaries suddenly remembered a meeting he'd never thought to mention. A mid-level executive at the Jersey development firm began to cough up details under casual conversation. I learned how to listen to silence and read the pauses on conference calls like a map. But I didn't just gather dirt. I collected witnesses. I turned whispers into names, names into documents, documents into patterns. I threaded against 2 weaknesses Ethan had: hubris and the need for public approval. He cared deeply what the market and the press thought. That vanity would be his undoing. There were nights when I almost broke. When I looked at my mother's necklace and imagined sliding it into Ethan's palm with an apology and a plea. But the necklace had become my talisman, a reminder that some debts must be paid not with money, but with truth. I also learned to protect myself. I changed passwords. I opened burner accounts. I met with a lawyer who never asked why I needed discretion, just how deep I wanted to go. She warned me, "He'll strike back. Be ready." I smiled and felt the cold certainty in my bones. Ready was the only acceptable answer. Ethan continued to ascend in public. My brother still played the role of dutiful son on camera, the face of a company that cared about communities and homes. The children in charity photos were never the same children who sat across from him at the old oak table. He was performing, and the world applauded. The net was invisible then, a lattice of tiny, nearly imperceptible threads. No one would notice until the day I started to pull. And when I did pull the first thread, everything I had built could unravel, or so I hoped. But there was one variable I hadn't fully accounted for, a secret from our father's past that showed up in a document Ryan dug up late one night. It was small, almost meaningless on its face. But secrets like that have a way of growing teeth when they bite. I held the paper in my hands and felt my heart start to run. This was where the plan could tip into something irreversible. This was where I had to choose how far I would go. The paper Ryan slid across my kitchen table that night looked harmless. I didn't sleep that night. An old deed, I didn't need yellowed at the edges, a notation in a hand that trembled with age. And I was about to decide which window to open. But when I read it, my stomach dropped out from under me. Hidden in the fine print was a clause our father had signed years before, a transfer of a small parcel of land to a man with a name I'd never heard. The signatures were real, the dates lined up, and tucked into the margin, in a looping scrawl, was a reference to a loan, one that had been quietly paid off with funds routed through a shell company that, somehow, led back into the Whitmore holdings. It was the kind of thing journalists dream about and family members dread. A breadcrumb pointing to something darker. Our father had been mixed up in deals he never told us about. Or worse, he'd been forced into them. And if that trail connected to certain developers Ethan had later partnered with, the fallout could crush more than just his reputation. It could topple us. My head spun from a different fear. This truth could vindicate me. It could be the blade that cut through Ethan's polished public image, but it could also rip open a wound in our family none of us could stitch back together.
There were faces I loved that might be ruined along with him. There were values my father tried to teach us that would be trampled in headlines. I felt the gravity of what I had uncovered like a physical pressure on my chest. I sat with Ryan for hours, the clock in the dark apartment the only witness. We replayed the possible outcomes like chess moves. If we released the documents to the press, Ethan's investors would pull back, banks would freeze lines of credit, and regulators would come knocking. If we used the information as leverage, blackmail, essentially, we could force a settlement, take control of certain assets, and protect the family name. But blackmail would stain me. It would make me no better than the man I was trying to stop. I trusted Dad, Ryan whispered. If he did this, why? Who did he owe? Who did he protect? His voice was small, a child again lost in a house far too big for him. I wanted to soothe him. I wanted answers. But I also wanted justice. I thought of Margaret, my mother, whose memory lived in the lilt of the way she called our names. She had always believed that truth mattered more than victory. Sitting there, I felt her as if she were beside me, and for a fleeting second, I heard her say, "Do this the right way, Claire." Maybe it was wishful thinking. Maybe it was the echo of a conscience I was proud to still have. The next days were a careful waltz. I fed vetted pieces of the puzzle to my lawyer, who built a safe path for disclosure that would prioritize regulatory channels over tabloids. We reached out quietly to a journalist known for meticulous, slow-burn investigations, someone who didn't crave shock but accuracy. I told myself this wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth. I told myself that was enough to sleep at night. But action breeds consequence. Ethan began to smell trouble. An investor pulled a meeting forward. A board member requested a private audit. He started calling Ryan more often, asking about the family, about concerns that needed calming. Each time Ryan smiled and assured him everything was fine while our home rang with a silence that carried secrets. And then there was the personal cost I hadn't fully counted on. I watched Ryan change. The boy who once left me drawings on our fridge started to flinch when the phone rang. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and resolve, as if he'd crossed a line and couldn't return. I realized revenge had a shape. It carved away the edges of you until something new, hardened perhaps, took its place. We were committed now. The journalist had agreed to look at the documents under strict embargo. The lawyer had a plan to notify regulators in a way that would ensure the truth came out with legal teeth. But the path forward meant one more thing. I had to face Ethan. Not with a scream, not with a file to fling on a table. I had to cross the room where we shared childhood birthdays and sit in front of the man who had become my enemy and tell him calmly that everything I'd found would be coming to light. That was the move that would split the world. That was the moment I would either become the hero of my own story or watch everything I loved burn. I hadn't seen Ethan face to face in nearly a year. But when I walked back into the Whitmore estate, the air smelled the same. Cedarwood polish, faint cigar smoke, the perfume of a house that wore wealth like a second skin. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory. He was waiting for me in our father's old study, sitting in the leather chair that once belonged to Henry, the chair that made Ethan look like a king holding court. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't warmth. It was calculation. "Claire," he said smoothly, "to what do I owe this rare visit?" I sat across from him, my heart steady, my mother's necklace cool against my collarbone. I didn't flinch. "I came to tell you something you won't like. Everything you've built, every shady deal, every false paper trail. It's over. I've got proof. And soon the whole world will see it. For the first time, his smile faltered. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. You don't know what you're playing with. Oh, I do, I said, keeping my voice calm, almost too calm. I know you stole from your own blood. I know you poisoned Dad's legacy. And I know you think you're untouchable. But here's the truth, Ethan. Untouchable men don't exist. They just fall harder when someone finally pushes. He slammed his fist on the desk, the mask slipping. Do you think the board will side with you? Do you think investors will believe some bitter little sister over me? I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. They'll believe the documents, the witnesses, the money trail. And when the truth comes out, they won't just believe me. They'll abandon you. The silence between us felt like a storm about to break. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Fear. He covered it quickly, of course, straightening his tie, scoffing as though my words were just noise. But I knew. I had finally cracked the armor. When I left that room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Within weeks, the first articles hit. The journalist's piece went live, meticulous, detailed, impossible to deny. Regulators launched their investigation. Banks froze accounts. Partners withdrew. The empire Ethan had clutched so tightly began to crumble piece by piece under the weight of truth. Ryan and I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, not with glee, but with a grim acceptance. Revenge doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like gravity pulling something down that should have fallen long ago. The Whitmore name would never mean the same in Connecticut again. Some whispered about scandal. Others pitied us. But I didn't care. For me, justice wasn't about the whispers. It was about knowing Ethan finally paid the price. One night, Ryan asked me if it was worth it. Losing the family we once were. Breaking what little bond remained. I touched the necklace at my throat and said, sometimes you have to let something shatter completely before you can build anything true. And as for Ethan, he vanished from the public eye, stripped of his power, his pride, his empire. But I know men like him don't disappear forever. They wait, they plot. Maybe one day, he'll come back for me. Maybe he'll try. But I'm not the same sister he betrayed. I am the storm he created. And if he returns, I'll be ready.